Well, hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's great to have David Cranmer Underdown back again for one of our Wednesday night duos. And how are you tonight, David?
I'm doing well. It sounds like the theme song's still playing. Can you hear it?
No, I don't hear it. Is it still playing?
Yeah, it is playing, but I'll just okay, it's gone now. I'm doing well and
There's not an echo, is there?
no, I don't think so. It just with that countdown music was continuing to play, so I've never heard that before.
Do, 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 do. All right. Well, that's the theme from Twilight Zone, in case you didn't
I
recognize.
know, and I felt like it tied into the New Year's Eve with the countdown and the ball in Times Square.
How'd that go? Did that go all right?
Stabbing, so didn't they clear it out? I didn't watch it. I was heartbroken because I'm a lifelong Michigan football fan, and they did not have a didn't have a great game on New Year's Eve. And then I was watching the second game, the Georgia and Ohio State game after.
Was that any better?
Well, if you're a Michigan fan, then you always don't want Ohio State to have a great year, but they played really well and then lost in the very end. So you're sort of torn because you want the Big Ten to do well and the SEC. And I know that you've got your Georgia roots, and they've got great teams down there. And Big Ten always wants to do well against them and not be a premier conference.
Go Dogs.
Yep.
Um, well, you mentioned Michigan, and I personally was not aware of the sanctity and the high level stature of the University of Michigan. The esteem in which it is held by people throughout the Midwest, especially some place around where you might be living. So forgive me if I did not do the proper obeisance to the great place. But President Kennedy has already done that for us when he addressed the University of Michigan and told them that he went to a small college known as the Michigan of the East.
That's right.
And I think that was a fitting tribute and an example of a kind of a combination of Irish and political wit that was part of the charm, the Kennedy charm.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather had it in a way. It's not just saying something; it's saying something with a bit of a twist to it,
Mm-hmm.
and that somehow we just don't have that anymore. Uh, you
Yeah.
don't get a clever turn of phrase out of a Joe Biden.
No. But yeah, I mean, all of that history with Kennedy at University of Michigan. He announced the Peace Corps on the steps of the student union at U of M, and he was working really closely with a great union leader named Walter Reuther, who was the president of the United Auto Workers. That I think was a pretty close confidant for JFK. He was advising him on different policies, and University of Michigan was a place where JFK did have some of his big moments.
Another subject, if I may, Mark, of course, is Mark Kulak at Housatonic Live has been doing a lot of great work lately, and um, one of the things I took away from his most recent one is that his opinion, and before I say his opinion, I want to say that we have opinions that change. We're not here to say here's the facts. We're saying here this is what I believe at this point in time. But ask me tomorrow, I might have learned something different. So just when I say this is Mark's opinion, don't hold him to it. If it's new information comes, he might have a new opinion. But what he's saying is that there's a competition going on for the lead in the exploration of of the human genome, and that this is what's really going on behind the scenes, is that this competition. And I think that that makes a lot of sense because, as you know, I mean, one of my themes has been there's competition between two big groups of American powers, and without getting into the details, I keep looking for that big divide between these guys and those guys. And often I find, the New England guys and the Texas guys may be different sides, for instance. But in the case of the Human Genome Project, it seems to be a kind of a CIA versus Pentagon thing, if I'm following Mark correctly. And I know that you're pretty interested in this subject too. So I'd like to hear how you react to the idea of, do you think that that's accurate, that there is this competition to be the lead dog in the fight to conquer, the last little bit of the human genome before they can, say, hey, we got it. And now we're going to, build robots in space or something.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about Harvard and University of Michigan, because those are two of the three really big areas that were involved in the Human Genome Project. With most people remember Francis Collins, who was the director of the NIH, and he was one of the lead scientists working on the Human Genome Project at University of Michigan. One
And
of the
from Stanton, Virginia, I would like to say, Stanton, Virginia, home of Western State Mental Hospital of Virginia, where there was access to a number of willing volunteers for different services. Just had to throw that in there,
yeah.
Francis.
Well, so you have Francis Collins, and then you had Dr. Francis, who was the mentor of Jonas Salk at the University of Michigan. Then you at Harvard with your East Coast Boston Brahmin characters, they have the Whitehead Institute, was one of the major facilities that was working on the Human Genome Project. And then, as Mark has shown us, when Bill Clinton announced the success of the Human Genome Project, it was at Caltech at Jet Propulsion Lab, and the scientists that were brought forward as the leaders of the program was Francis Collins and Craig Venter, who Mark has done a lot of shows on. And Craig Venter, he was, I believe, working at the Salk Institute. It could have been Scripps, but they're very close to each other in La Jolla, California. But that's always an interesting track as well, because Jonas Salk was, of course, from New York, and then he studied at Pittsburgh, at the University of Pittsburgh, and then at University of Michigan, where he worked with the Park Davis Pharmaceutical Company, which I've mentioned quite a few times. That was one of the 5 companies that made the polio vaccine. But that Salk Institute also has intrigue with the Manhattan Project, because one of the scientists that helps found it is Leo Szilard, who with Albert Einstein writes the letter, the Szilard-Einstein letter, that's hand delivered by Bill Barr's great uncle Alexander Sachs to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the Salk side was the March of Dimes, and that was the founding of the Salk Institute, was through the March of Dimes. So that's something that's interesting to look at too.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I've been trying to make sure I got this. You're saying that Jonas Salk and Leo Szilard had a relationship of some kind? What was that?
Yeah, when they founded the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. And then if you want to go to your Texas.
So Szilard was one of the founders of the Salk Institute?
Correct. And he lived in a cabana at the Hotel Del Cerro, which is where our friends Clint Murchison and
You're kidding me.
Where FDR used to go and gamble with his what's his name, Clyde Tolston. They used to stay there every year, and they'd go gamble together.
Wait a minute. You meant Hoover, right?
J. Edgar Hoover, correct.
Yeah, I think you might have said FDR by mistake.
Oh no, I meant no. It was so the people that so it was the
But you're saying that Leos, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
yeah,
but Leos Lazard is this famous Hungarian scientist that knows all about atomic, uh, fission and weaponry, and was, one of the most important influencers on uh, Roosevelt to do the Manhattan Project.
that's correct. Yeah, and he was
And so,
very
so what does he have to do with the Salk Institute?
he was one of the founders of the Salk Institute, and he lived in La Jolla at the Hotel del Charo at the end of his life. And because again, I don't know if he was working on the nuclear medicine that we had talked about before, but he was somebody that was, grew up in Hungary and went to school with a lot of the Manhattan Project. The Hungarians were called the Martians. That was their whole nickname. And they had, a lot of the famous, you know, uh, von Karman and I mean, the Enrique Fermi was an Italian, but he's sort of in that same group. But again, all those guys used to go to the University of Michigan for the science conferences in the 30s and 40s. And the guy that led the Alsos mission, which is the ALSOS, which was uh, the OSS's evaluation of the German nuclear program, which was led by the physics professor at the University of Michigan named Samuel Goldschmidt.
Goldschmidt, yeah.
Yeah, and
And
he was
Boris Posh was the muscle on that trip, and
he was
he became a member of the Health Alteration Committee.
and he also went out to with our friend Willoughby. He went out to Japan as well later, but he was of course was a high school teacher in Los Angeles, California, but he was the head of security for Lawrence Livermore during the war, and he was
Yeah,
this commando that works with this University of Michigan, physics professor that lives in Ann Arbor, and for years, I think for 15 years, hosted these science conferences where the Oppenheimers and uh, Fermis and all these guys come to the University of Michigan in the summer, and they exchange ideas, which then plays into this Einstein Slizzard letter, which is delivered to FDR, because these guys that they're Europeans, and they're very tied in with the German sciences at Kaiser Wilhelm Institute specifically, and so they knew those guys. And when Goldschmidt gets into Eisenberg's offices, where he's the head of the German atomic program.
is that
He
who Eisenberg is, the head of the German program?
he's the head of the German. He's like the Oppenheimer for Germany. He's the head of their nuclear program.
Just so people can follow along, make sure, and when you put a new name in, let us know.
Well,
Yeah.
most people know Eisenberg because if you watched the Breaking Bad show, that was the nickname that Walter White gave himself as the super genius scientist. Only he was cooking amphetamine. He called himself Eisenberg.
Okay.
I always remember it is because he was Eisenberg in that show.
I
But
haven't seen this show. That's my problem.
yeah, it was a great show. But anyway, so Eisenberg is this German atomic scientist, and when Goldschmidt, gets into his offices to go through the papers and evaluate their program, the story is that there was a picture of them together, Goldschmidt and Eisenberg, from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor
Hmm.
conference, and they were best friends. And that's a very intriguing situation, because Goldschmidt then leaves the University of Michigan and then ends up at Brookhaven out in Long Island uh, after the war. So again, those are like the intrigues of the University of Michigan, which um, when I watch a Michigan football game, there's a lot packed into the history of it all.
You know, it's an example of one of the other kind of moral and ethical points that somehow just has gotten glossed over in this in our times, and that is this. It used to be a clear difference between war and peace. And during war times, you never traded information with the enemy, of course. You wouldn't want them to know how you make your fuses for your bombs, for instance, because they'd make a better fuse and then you'd lose. So you keep everything to yourself. But in the peacetime, the whole different ethic applied in at least in my memory of how things used to be was that science rides above all of these national and international conspiracy troubles, and that a scientist is a scientist is a scientist. And if I figure out somehow, to transform, something worthless into something valuable, I'm going to share it with my colleagues because they're working on the same problem, and it's for the good of humanity that we're doing this science. So we figured out how to, turn seawater into wonderful drinking water for 1 cent a gallon. And like, wow, I can do that. And so I am a scientist, I'm working for humanity as a principle. That's why did I learn all this stuff if it wasn't to help the world, to help people live better lives, longer, healthier, etc. That is science in a kind of a sense that's just not thought of anymore because we've blurred the line between war and peace so badly. We don't have the sense that I can trust those Russian scientists with my latest discoveries about how to manipulate, the plutonium in a nuclear bomb. Maybe I better not tell them. On the other hand, the fact of the matter is, it appears that this information was flowing back and forth all through the 50s, all through the Cold War, on a very similar type of a principle that, well, they're going to figure it out sooner or later. I might as well tell them. And, we're brothers, we're scientists, so I can tell them. Then again, is that all part of a larger plot to reduce the world into one big totalitarian empire? That's a big question. But getting back to just to the more minute point of, do you understand what I'm saying about, it used to be there was a world, at least an ideal world, in which science was always done for the good of humanity, and nobody would do something, as crazy as create a killer virus that couldn't be, uh, uh, defeated with medicine.
Well, I mean, sadly, I think that, when you look back in the history of medicine, I think poisons are part of history, and it's again, it's like I I I look at even like the Nobel Peace Prize, which is the greatest award that a scientist internationally can win, and what does that come from? I mean, it's from the TNT patent that Alfred Nobel created. I mean, that he donated 10% of, I think, of his TNT patent, which again, like all of these technologies, it can be used to create tunnels, or clear area to build a road or a canal, which can be a good thing, but it can also be used to blow people up, or blow up cities, or whatnot. So it's I don't, again, it's one of those things where it's hard, because I don't think that, I think that a lot of the scientists that are in these programs are, have those ideals, like you said, where they're looking to move the science forward, and have new inventions, things that can help humanity, where there are others that I think want to have, like asked at the beginning of the show, like, is the Human Genome Project, is that going to be a lever of control that can never be defeated if you have that specific of control over people down to their microscopic level, then I can see that being the plan for a certain group within those scientific communities. But again, like I look at I always look at like people that I knew in my own life, and I think my grandpa was somebody that worked on a lot of the fuses, and he was a brainy, quiet, humble person, and I think he was working in these programs. But again, like I don't think that he was somebody that was in with like a eugenics group, which is a lot of times you know where you find those people are in these royal societies or things like that, where you're going to combine these intellectuals that are coming up with these ideas for how to steer society with also the same groups of intellectuals that are more into the pure sciences that would be coming up with different ways to create either like building materials or medicines, things like that, and they all work. So I don't know, I don't know how to answer it, but the things that I look at is the patterns, and with this Manhattan Project, with all these scientists at University of Michigan. That's another thing that I think that most people don't remember, was that Robert Oppenheimer went up to Lake Otsego in Gaylord, Michigan, to meet with Carl Compton, who was one of the directors of the National Defense Research Council that became the president of MIT. They went out on a rowboat in Lake Otsego, Michigan, to decide to proceed with the Manhattan Project. So these are the characters that were at the University of Michigan conferences. And then I talked about Jonas Salk working with this Park Davis pharmaceutical company, and that was the same Park Davis where Harvey Merker, who was the chief chemist, he was partners with Neil Gordon at Wayne State University in Detroit, where Park Davis was based. And he was the one that started these conferences at Gibson Island, the Gordon Research Conferences. So is this just the continuation from Ann Arbor? Have we moved these research conferences, which are tied into General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, all of these companies that everybody thinks of as auto companies, but during wartime, as you said, they retool for the weapons of war. And even looking at characters that people love to that are really cite, like Werner von Braun. He and his brothers were working for the Opel company, which was General Motors. General Motors owned Opel starting in 1933. And the rocket scientists at Opel were the ones that created the rocket club, and I can't think of the name of it because it's in German, but basically they combined rocket scientists, people that were working on supersonic flight and jet engines for Opel, which is like a General Motors, a giant GM. Also, people need to remember, was also North American Aviation, that became Consolidated Air, that became Convair, which became General Dynamics. So like you can follow that like trail of how these huge corporations were involved in all kinds of different projects. But von Braun, who people remember comes in and is working in the I think the Air Force first before they create NASA, but he was with Opel, which was a General Motors company. So again, with GM and Wayne State being right next to each other, that's the connections that I look at. And it's just hard because these are the families that I grew up around, and I don't know, it's crazy sometimes because we don't have like the Silicon Valley like billionaire people that live here now. But if you go back a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations, these are all the industrialists that are working on a lot of these programs.
Thank you for connecting so many great connections there. Let's go back to Oppenheimer and back to my theme about how the science tended to migrate into the Soviet Union somehow magically. It, you left Oppenheimer and Compton on a boat in late Otsego, is it?
Lake Otsego, where I used to go skiing as a little kid at the Otsego Ski Club. So again, it's like all these things that you never knew that happened there.
Water skiing?
No snow skiing. It's a golf and ski resort, which of course the family that started it is a big Cranbrook family, and of course I'm like friends with one of the granddaughters and everything. So it's like it's surreal sometimes.
Well, it is surreal, and Oppenheimer, he was connected to the European financial Oppenheimers, right?
I think so. I mean, he fled Germany, and then he was like Bill Barr's family. He was living right by Columbia on Riverside Drive, and they said his family had the Picassos and Van Goghs in their apartment. That he came from a very wealthy family. So of course, I mean, they don't specifically say that he's part of the Oppenheimer, the Oppenheimer banking family, but if you assume that the person that becomes the head of this most expensive federal project in U.S. history at the time, that he probably is related to the Oppenheimers that staked the Anglo-American company and De Beers, and was one of the banking families where Amschel Rothschild, the patron of the Rothschild family, was the apprentice to the Oppenheimer family in Frankfurt. So yeah, I assume that they are all connected. Oppenheimer.
I guess I was making that assumption myself, but I'm glad you clarify. It's interesting that you clarified that you and I together do not specifically have that tied down. So perhaps I'll do some digging on it. But again, with that amount of wealth, uh, there almost has to be a connection there. But also, and I'm a little fuzzy on it, but I do recall hearing that he had contacts in the Soviet Union, and possibly he was actually a communist himself.
I mean, he was just and again, like this, like he had his security clearance was taken. He was out at Lawrence Livermore, at Cal Berkeley, and then of course at Los Alamos, and and again, this is like all of the Rosenberg trials, and now you can bring in like the Roy Cohn story and all this stuff with the Rosenbergs and the Glassbergs and all that. I mean, it's crazy because the former governor of the state of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, who's now the head of the Department of Energy, she just last week waived or commuted his security clearance that was taken away or something. Just last week they did that. I mean, it's just like wild that Jennifer is that these are the problems that the Department of Energy is tackling in 2022 or whatever, the very end of the year.
The Oppenheimer security hearing was a 1954 proceeding by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission that explored the background actions and associations of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the American scientist who had headed the Los Alamos laboratory during World War II, where he played a key part in the Manhattan Project. The hearing resulted in Oppenheimer's Q clearance being revoked. And you're saying that Jennifer just reinstated it?
Just last week, yeah.
What a
Or
coincidence, and here we are. I had no idea we were gonna be talking about Oppenheimer tonight, and there she's just, she set it up for us. Uh,
yeah,
Doubts about Oppenheimer's loyalty dated back to the 1930s when he was a member of numerous Communist Front organizations and was associated with Communist Party USA members, including his wife and his brother. So it just makes the question kind of obvious that, okay, they're going to develop the most powerful bomb that's ever been created in human history, the bomb that could possibly destroy civilization, and they're not going to keep it away from this commie. And matter of fact, they're going to let him lead the project. Here, Oppenheimer, you carry the ball on this guy. We want you to be our man, knowing that at least some reasonable people think that he is a communist. And if he is a real communist, as a communist, were back then, and probably still are, communism is much more important than nationality. So you share your information with your brother, workers of the world, unite. And that's going to be a conundrum that I'm going to try to sort through, because why indeed would the United States, unless they thought, he's this incredible, he's like an Einstein, he's the only guy that can possibly do this, and then it goes into a different kind of absurdity, doesn't it? That, are you sure there's only one guy could possibly do this? There's not anybody smart enough in any of the institutions in the Western world other than Robert Oppenheimer to lead this project. I don't buy it.
Well, if you're gonna create any kind of explosive, you're obviously going to go to the military, and then you're going to go to DuPont if you're an American, or you're going to go to Noble if you're Sweden, or Vickers or IG Farben. They're the experts in chemistry and in munitions. So you're going to be pulling people from those pools. The Army Engineering Corps, or things. Those are the groups that you're going to draw from. But again, like the whole communism thing, like I don't know. I mean, if it truly is an Oppenheimer, then he's going to be he's going to be that family was like the bankers to the czar, so they're going to be at the very top of the banking community, and that's going to be his background. Is as you've talked about, what's good for business. He's going to be very much in that camp before the the peasants having taking the I mean, unless it's their rivals' land that they take away and then let them have a farm, community farm or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, their family. If he is that Oppenheimer, then he's Anglo American company. Then now you're right in with the Rhodes Group and the Milners and the whole Chatham House that Harley was talking about, which to my mind, the Chatham House and the Council on Foreign Relations were created basically simultaneously by the sort of the same, this Anglo-American sort of East India Company type model that we've talked about a lot. That's the group that he's going to be coming from more than the communist stuff, because Mark Kulak was he was writing me earlier today and encouraging me to basically try to think of stories more than just like listing lots of characters, because it's hard for people to remember that, but people can remember stories. And some of the big stories that I think of is that this Indiana group that my mom's family is from, I really think they are the original communists, which, I mean, it sounds crazy to say that because it's going back to like the early 19th century. But this New Harmony colony that and again, I don't know if they were specifically in the New Harmony colony, but it was started by a guy named Richard Owen, and it was sort of it was basically where he brought in a lot of top scientists from Germany and Switzerland and England that went to this very small area on the Wabash River in southern Indiana, and they set up this colony, which was very much, to my mind, like a communist colony. Like they wanted to be very self-sufficient. They didn't want to rely on the government. They didn't want to. They wanted to, create everything they needed on their own community. Now, whether that was, we need to eliminate all the people around us or just leave us alone, in our own little area, I don't know. I mean, based on what I know specifically with my own family, I would say it's probably the latter, where they were more just, wanted to do their own thing. But again, Owen's children founded Indiana University, Purdue University, and there's a lot of eugenics background at IU. As I've mentioned before, David Starr Jordan, who becomes the first president of Stanford, was the president of Indiana University before he headed out to California, and he was one of the leaders of the the eugenics programs. So it's very those are the things that I think about, like, because like also like as far as like communism, like I think of like the camp that I went to. I mentioned that camp I went to where it's sort of like again, communism has been such a loaded word forever, for the people that lived through the Cold War, and we basically had an entire, you know, 70 years of fighting the idea of communism. But again, it's like I don't, we talked about Walter Reuther. He was somebody that visited Eugene Debs, who was a big communist, and he was a Terre Haute person, and he was affiliated with Indiana State University. And there's a lot of intelligence people that come from Indiana State, but also scientists. The guy that became the head of the Rad Lab, which was at MIT, was a guy named Lee DeBridge, and his dad was the football coach at Indiana State. And guys like Ray Klein, who I know you've studied, being a big spy master, he was from Terre Haute. And then
I
William,
didn't know Rick Klein was from Terre Haute. Yeah.
yeah, William
Uh,
King Harvey is also from Terre Haute. His mom was an English teacher at Indiana State. So it's just like,
it is, I understand what mm, that is an amazing, just again, an amazing bunch of connections that nobody else would have come up with. I mean, it's just priceless that you can tie all these things together. Um, I'm thinking of what Mark had said, and I agree that sometimes there's it overwhelms the ability to remember the
yeah,
the number of connections that are going. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's great stuff, and I really appreciate it.
yeah. It's just it's
But Ray Klein is from Terre Haute, Indiana. I mean,
and another.
why Terre Haute? Have you figured it out yet?
Well,
Everything.
I think about it a lot, and I think that New Harmony is one of the reasons. But also, it's French. The Wabash River was the New France colony. So, like Detroit and Montreal and St. Louis, the cities were Vincennes, Terre Haute, Vigo, who we've talked about with the Vigo Ordnance Factory, which became the big bioweapon center in Terre Haute. That was a Jesuit priest from France, was Vigo, and he donated to Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, because they were fighting the French and Indian War. Was that right?
Yeah, Tecumseh, right?
Tecumseh, and it was Vigo who was this priest that was donated to the American effort. And Vigo County is the county that Terre Haute is in, and Vincennes was the capital of the Northwest Territories. So there's a lot of it was the far kind of the west coast of America in its day. And again, with this New Harmony, they brought in this guy named William McClure, who I think is potentially related to both my grandma and grandpa's family, because they have McClures on both sides. And he was somebody that was known as a great geologist. He was the head of he created the first geological map in the world, and was the head of the Geological Society. And he was it's supposedly made a lot of money in Philadelphia as a trader, and then moved out to Indiana to do this geological survey of the United States and the Appalachian and all that stuff. And he lived in New Harmony. So, and again, it's like, you've been doing all these really interesting readings on the Sullivan and Cromwell, and of course the Dulles brothers are somebody that we always focus on. And you know, John Watson Foster was from Petersburg, Indiana, which is like two towns over from where my grandparents lived in Patoka and Princeton, Indiana, is Petersburg, and it is literally farm country. And so how the Secretary of State of the United States, comes from a farm in Petersburg, Indiana, to then have, his grandsons become these just unbelievable forces as far as overthrows and intelligence and diplomacy. Um, Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles, like it's crazy to me.
Well, once you said Jesuit, I started realizing there's a lot of research that I need to do because I did not know that the Wabash community was French, and thinking of a name like Vincennes, which for some reason came up in my research earlier today because it turns out there's a place in Vincennes, and I think it's in France, right?
It
Yeah,
was,
Vincennes,
yeah,
where one of the ancient holy relics got taken to by one of the old emperors, and it's some kind of a real major uh, uh,
thorny crown.
pilgrimage place. What?
It was the thorny crown of Jesus and it was where the kings of France lived. It was that they had
The Merovingians?
it, I and
Oh,
again I
never
don't know.
mind. Let's not get too esoteric here, but that's
No,
that's that's
but
fascinating. So,
where the
if
Medici
that's
moved.
where the story is, sorry, if the story is that the the ancient relics of Jesus ended up in Vincennes, France, and then there's this place called Vincennes, and then there's a Jesuit there. I mean, I'm thinking that no matter who is running the country, whether it's France, Britain, or the United States, there's still that power, that ancient power that started out there that you've enlightened me to, and it's fascinating. So I'm going to have to do
Yeah,
some digging in that area.
yeah. Look at so the old trade route to the Mississippi River used to be from Chicago, and then they would portage to the Wabash River, and then they go down between Ohio and Indiana, down to the Ohio River, and then they would get that to the Mississippi, and that was basically the trade route that was the major way to get and again, like, now you're kind of getting into this idea of the Knights of the Golden Circle, where you're controlling this Ohio River to the um to the Mississippi
Caribbean.
to get to the Caribbean. and and yeah, like even the University of Michigan was founded by Gabriel Richard, was one of the three founders of the University of Michigan when they chartered it, and he of course was a Jesuit priest from France, and he was the priest at St. Anne's, which was the first structure built in Fort Detroit originally, which is the old Catholic church in Detroit. And then he also goes up to Mackinac Island and sets up a St. Anne's in Mackinac, which later is the headquarters of John Jacob Astor, who was a German, but was he a Catholic German? I don't really know that much about John Jacob Astor's history, but he of course um, gets out of the fur business and goes into the real estate business in Manhattan. But all these old connections is really interesting to me because as we've talked about, like, Baltimore has a lot of French connections with the Patterson family marrying into the Bonapartes, and of course with uh, Monroe. His daughter was in the court at Versailles and was very good friends with Napoleon the Third's wife, I believe. Um, so there's a lot of kind of like unknown connections between the the original founding of the United States, because again, like, we think of the New England colonies, but there was so much debate in the founding of the country over whether we should partner with France or there were you've talked about that with the kind of the cowboy and the Indian War, with the New England was really wanted to keep these trade relationships that they'd had with England, where more of the Virginia Company, even though it was chartered by the English, they were much more open to trading and diplomatic ties with France. So those are all things that are intriguing. And then of course with the Mississippi Purchase, that was from France, which is Um, Also was Barings Bank and Hope Bank were the banks that, which is a Dutch bank and a English slash German bank that sell the Louisiana Purchase, which also ties into all this stuff.
Yeah, and from Louis Napoleon to Charles Bonaparte, uh, the first the Attorney General who
Right.
began the FBI, and J. Edgar Hoover. All of that is all connected, and directly back to Europe. It's like they never stopped these imperial and quasi-imperial connections that are just like tentacles that go up through Detroit, up through the lakes, and into Canada, across into Europe. And well, in the few minutes we have left, I want to call to your attention the video I was talking with Harley Schlanger about yesterday. I know you haven't had a chance to see it. It's called The Spider's Web, Britain's Second Empire. And the theme of it, which I was very much impressed with, is that when Britain at the end of World War One realized that they were going to lose their overseas colonies and it was going to happen and there wasn't anything they could do about it, uh, the great banking families and elites of the city of London, that exempt financial center in the middle of Greater London, uh, decided collectively to abandon their interest in productive industry, resources, mining, and things like that, and go directly into finance and to become the financial capital of the new economy. And when they made that decision, they understood that they were going to have to find a way to accept dirty money into their financial system. And they consciously decided to do it. I guess it's kind of like Compton and Oppenheimer sitting in a rowboat one day, and all the smart people in the city of London just got together one day, and maybe they went out on the Thames in their rowboats, and they said, "Hey, we got to figure out what to do." Well, the best thing, easiest thing to do is to just get in bed with organized crime and, set up some tax shelters in various islands around the world. As we recede from the overt control of these countries, we'll still control them by controlling the banking, and we will set up a system in which our hands will be clean, but we will benefit from the cash flow of all that dirty money going through. And then so they set up the Cayman Islands, and they set up Bermuda, and they set up the Bahamas, and they set up different places around the world that we can all name by now because we understand what's going on. It's offshore banking, and that's a tax dodge, which basically is the idea is it keeps the system afloat by keeping all of the elites in their elite position by virtue of the fact that they take advantage of the offshore tax havens and never have to pay any taxes. Thereby, they can maintain their control over everything. And we end up paying all the burden because we're the plebes. We pay the taxes. We're too dumb to invent tax havens in the Caribbean islands. So that division of society between the elites and the plebes that kind of accept it rings true to me. Um, so in the few minutes you have left, tell me, does it ring true with you? Does it? What he said was there's $50 trillion in
Yeah.
in these tax havens right now, and well, $50 trillion would go a long way to solving the world's problems, but it's not being used. It's just sitting in those tax havens, maybe being traded off. You can have the yacht, and I'll take the condo in Dubai. Um, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of it is, you've personally described as sort of the what your father had to face as far as, you know it, and and yeah, you can go back to Sir Francis Drake and the pirates and the privateers, and raiding the Spanish galleons or whatever for the silver fleets.
But that
But
was legal.
well, it was, but again, it was set up the same way they set up the East India Company. They would give a privilege to the sailors to, basically raid their rivals' shipping lanes, and that
Yeah.
was a chartered contract that was given, by the monarch or the authority to do that. Um, in more modern times, of course, like I'm, you know, very interested in what the books you've read as far as talking about like the Golden Triangle and the French Connection and sort of these historic opium or routes that have been around for, I mean, centuries. I mean, like going back to the Marco Polo or the Silk Road, and or the Venetian traders that you've talked about, or the um the um the Genoa's navy, the Genovese's or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
we, all that. So I think these systems have been around. I really like looking at, of course, like the Castle Bank and Trust and the BCCI and the Nugan Hand and all these systems that they've used, that and sort of try to figure out what they're up to now, because I do think that um, there's a lot of plunder, obviously, like when you say like there's 50 trillion, and I mean, they have world wars over that. I mean, they do genocide to accumulate that, and nobody wants to fess up to that. I don't think. And so they've created systems, offshore accounts, used shell corporations to hide these, the what do they call it, the drugs, oil, and guns. That the whole that system is, I mean, it's something that I look at. I mean, I think that, like, with now, like, in 2023, I do think that the Sam Bankman-Fried is sort of a contemporary face of it, with the cryptocurrency. I think that they come up with new methods of um, hiding assets or getting you distracted with like a intriguing character like a Sam Bankman-Fried, where but again, like the whole creation myth of Sam Bankman-Fried is so outrageous, in the sense that he was just able to, like, do this arbitrage trade over and over again, which is like doesn't make any sense. But um but I do think that they use it to um to do things like, a lot of people are very interested in the financing political campaigns and things like that. And of course, the war in Ukraine is a big topic, but I also look at, of course, like the things you've studied, as far as the overthrows, the covert overthrows using intelligence organizations, and how those operations are financed. And that's the way, to me, that is the answer for how those organizations are financed, where will hire a Reinhard Gallon's organization, and send over part of the commandos to train in South America and whatnot. Like, you need a way to entice people. I mean, I guess you can have just compromise on them, but you also have to have a way to entice them to fight for you, or to do horrible actions on your behalf as their proxy. So you need assets to finance that stuff.
I was just looking for my copy of Crimes of Patriots by Jonathan Whitney, which is a book I read on my show, I think as many as almost 4 years ago now. And I'm going to try to republish my books. But that book in particular, I think, rings true with what you just said, where it's quite clear that the Nugan Hand Bank and the Castle Trust were created in order to finance special operations. and that's why they sold the dope, and that's why they traded the guns for the dope in the Vang Pao and in the Kun Sa in Burma, and all of that stuff is real. And they created these banks to run the dirty money through. And if they didn't do that, the Anglo-American financial system might very well have toppled. And if we stopped doing it today, the Anglo-American financial system would probably fall. I mean, I think it's a fair estimate that over half of the money in our financial system now is dirty money. It's just come to that point where they have so much leverage by the fact of all of that. What they consider their wealth is tied up in our financial system, and there's where you know a lot of leverage behind the scenes is happening. When you think about what's the effect of all that on who becomes the Speaker of the House, you know, and these 20 people that are standing up and saying no to the California Representative Kevin McCarthy, who is I think fairly called a rhino, a deep state Republican, and these 20 people are standing up against it. But boy, they are getting hammered by the majority, and even President Trump had to urge them to stand down and let McCarthy win. And I think that's evidence of the power of the financial system behind the scenes. I don't think Trump would have said anything, but for the fact that, hey, at a certain point, you know, you do what they tell you.
Well,
That's what I.
yeah, well, I think that's true. I mean, I'm obviously frustrated with the leadership from both sides, and
Yeah.
I don't have really a rooting interest. I just hope that somebody will work on, I don't know, just get out of the cycle that we're in. I'm hopeful, but I don't know much about Kevin McCarthy's background really. I mean, I've looked at him a little bit, but even the even earlier today, I was having dinner at my family's house, and like we were talking about, like the number three person right now in the line of succession is the senator from Washington. I can't even remember her name, but I never even heard of her. I couldn't believe it. She's senator. She went to Washington State, and I can't even think of her name right now. But it's I there's a lot of like I don't and again like I don't know how much this this the speak and again like it's I don't really feel like I know like enough about it specifically to really I feel like Pelosi, yes, like based on her family history and legacy, that she did have influence, even going back to her father in Baltimore and his relationships. I think that she was somebody that was influential, but again, like I don't feel like I really know quite enough to comment a lot.
All right. Fair enough. Well, tomorrow morning we'll be back at 11 a.m. I'll be reading from Law Unto Itself, the untold story of the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, 100 years of creating power and wealth. And as a tease, I'll let you know that finally, drum roll, the Dulles brothers will enter into our story in
Oh boy.
chapter 4. So that's something to look forward to. And this Sullivan and Cromwell story, I think, really does fill in a part of history that's very important and very little known. And as you do every day on Twitter, we just keep peeling back layers and layers of the deep state's uh, cover stories, because
There's a
it
lot
does.
of
It's a lot of work, and but somehow I don't know. I love doing it. I'm doing it 9, 10 hours a day now.
yeah. Well, one thing with Sullivan and Cromwell too that I always like to remind is Harlan Fiske Stone, who was a Supreme Court justice. He was a Sullivan and Cromwell lawyer and a mentor to many important people like William Donovan, FDR, and J. Edgar Hoover. His brother was the president of Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, and our current Purdue University president is Mitch Daniels, who was a Richard Lugar protege that was the president of the Hudson Institute and was a leader at Eli Lilly in Indiana. So don't sleep on your Purdue history. I know Nick mentioned last week that Purdue is one of the many universities that are kind of part of this group, but I'm always looking at those links too.
All right, everybody in the chat room and everybody who's been with us on Facebook and YouTube tonight, thank you very much. And Happy New Year to everyone. We will be back tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, with A Law Unto Itself, and we'll see you then.